Welcome to the Under 8 podcast, a 3 times per week college basketball show brought to you in under 8 minutes. At the time of recording, it is March 26th, 12:33 a.m. My name is Josh Mullenix. On today's pod, the Sweet 16 on the women's side is pretty much set, and it's time to talk about it. It's all right now on the Under 8 podcast. Josh Doering here with me. Plenty of, just like on the men's side, there's a good amount of chalk when it comes to the women's bracket, but one place you look, you will not find it, and that is in the second round between the Ohio State Buckeyes and the Duke Blue Devils. Duke 75, the number 7 seed, number 2 Ohio State 63, and the Buckeyes, Josh, making an exit from this NCAA tournament that is much earlier than any of us thought they would.
And we talked about this a little bit off air, but not in the fashion you would expect either. You had laid this out that Cody McMahon was kind of going to be the litmus test, if you will, that was probably where this might go wrong, is if you didn't get that second scorer that is Cody McMahon usually. That wasn't the issue in this game. They were up 16 points early, and Reagan Richardson just kept making plays. 28 points, 11 of 18 from the field, 7 rebounds. And the longer it went, the more impressive Duke was. And yeah, it's really difficult, obviously, to go into somebody's building with their season on the line when you're massive underdogs, when you go down double digits early. And everybody but Cody McMahon really struggled. There was foul trouble. Just about everything that could go wrong outside of Cody McMahon kind of went wrong for the Buckeyes. And give credit to Kara Lawson and her team. This is a big win for Duke and an important step in kind of getting them back toward the upper echelon of the women's game. And you got your first major upset in the second round of the women's tournament once again.
You know, Duke 22-11 this season, and you know, there's a lot of results that were almost kind of foundational pieces, and they got a couple of really big wins. But when you look back on their season, they did a lot of playing some of the very best teams in the country really close. It was an 82-79 loss to Stanford. It was a 15-point loss to South Carolina, which I know doesn't sound especially close, but there aren't a ton of teams that can say that they only lost to South Carolina by 15 points this season. You go on down the line. You know, it's a 5-point loss to Virginia Tech on the road. It's an 8-point loss to Notre Dame. They get a win over NC State. They lose a close one to NC State right at the end of the season before the NCAA tournament. And there's a lot of these, like, clearly this type of performance was there somewhere. And they didn't ultimately close the door on very many of them. But when you look back at their resume and some of the wins they almost had, it's not the most surprising thing in the world that they were able to put the type of performance together on a night where, like you said, that JC Sheldon was not very good, that Cody McMahon was kind of the only form of consistent offense that the Buckeyes had, that on that type of night, of course, if Ohio State is clicking, Duke's probably not beating them, but they got the night that they needed. And on the Blue Devils side, you know, they got a performance from Reagan Richardson that was really, really special, and some nice performances from the supporting cast in it, and it was enough. And I think when you go back and look, that you'll see evidence that Duke would have been capable of doing this on the right night.
And up next, UConn.
Sure. Welcome to the latter rounds of the NCAA tournament. Duke 75, Ohio State 63. We sit here on Tuesday, March 26th, Josh, and one of my Final Fours is still intact completely. and it is not on the women's side for me. Some history, Josh, over the first few days of the NCAA tournament when it comes to individual scoring. What are we talking about here?
Yeah, obviously we'll start with Caitlin Clark. Seems like there aren't any more records to break, but she found another one.
Mm-hmm.
She now has the Division One women's single season scoring record. It took all the way to getting a late free throw for her to actually break it, but she does break it at the end of Iowa's somewhat stressful win over West Virginia. It
Mm-hmm.
was close, and then it kind of wasn't, and then it was very close until the last few possessions there. But ultimately, the Hawkeyes get it done. That was one of their worst offensive performances of the season. I think it was their worst offensive half in terms of points scored of the season. In the first half, Caitlin Clark scored half of their points. They had 4 players score.
Mm-hmm.
You texted me saying, I'm not convinced this team can win the tournament. Maybe this is the one stinker, and they go and score 80 points a game moving forward. And Caitlin Clark goes for 50, 10, and 8 in the Final Four or something like that. But what you saw in this game was clearly not good enough in
Mm-hmm.
terms of projecting toward a national championship, but it was enough to get to the Sweet 16, and that is all that matters at this moment in time.
Yeah, I think the way I would describe it is just if if they roll into the next game with that type of performance, if they roll into an Elite Eight game with that type of performance, they're probably not surviving it.
Yeah.
Um, that doesn't mean that I think they'll roll into the Sweet 16 and the Elite Eight with that type of performance. It's just a observation that it will need to be better in the next week if they want to get back to the Final Four and get back to and get to Cleveland in a couple weeks time. Like that today was, in a lot of ways it's about getting a performance that's good enough on that day and regrouping for the next one. And maybe that's just exactly what this is, but that would probably ultimately be the way that I would describe it, is that it will need to be better for Iowa to get where they want to be.
Yes, absolutely. And then the other piece of history here, Deasia Fair of Syracuse has 18 in the second half, 20 overall in their loss to UConn, which puts her third on the all-time scoring list. So congratulations to her on a terrific career. Sad to see it end, but ultimately they do come up short. Did you see what Gino Ariema said after the game?
I did not.
I'm
Inform
glad
me,
you haven't
please.
seen this yet. I'm curious for your live reaction here. I'm paraphrasing, but he basically said, we have the best. Obviously, Paige Beckers was fantastic in this game. He said we have the best player in the country. The stats show it. And I don't think he said everybody knows it, but maybe something along those lines. I don't have the quote in front of me, but he flat out came out and said Paige Beckers is the best player in the country.
I love it. First of all, um, partly because I don't know. Partly because it's a completely ludicrous thing to say, and the other part of it is the same conversation that you and I have had before. Like, what if Paige Beckers played like Caitlin Clark for 2 months?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what if they just simultaneously, kind of running parallel to one another, played the same brand of basketball for 2 straight months? I'm not saying that Paige Beckers would be would put up better numbers than Caitlin Clark. I'm not saying that she would have the career from an individual perspective that Caitlin Clark has. I think it's a possibility, but I of course wouldn't disrespect the individual achievement of Caitlin Clark's career by just saying that if someone else played like her, that it would just be kind of an automatic, you know, translation. But it's like Paige Beckers was supposed to be the next, like, this is the girl, this is the woman, this is the guard that everyone talks about,
Mm-hmm.
and she's just not that for, a couple of different reasons, whether it's because of the way that UConn plays, because the fact that she's been injured, and because Caitlin Clark exists. But I think it's I think it's a sick thing to say, and would be even sicker if they got to play each other in the Final Four. Um, but um, but I'm not into it.
And this is Gino. He knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
I'm not entirely sure what the. I mean, maybe this is just to give Paige Beckers a little bit more confidence. Maybe it's because he genuinely believes it. I don't know. But he didn't. He said this for a reason,
Hmm.
right? He's been doing this too long. He knows the ins and outs of how all of this stuff works.
Hmm.
He has a reason behind this, which I just find fascinating that he came out now and not just went to bat for his player, which you expect any coach to do, but said something that is going to get headlines and something that is going to be controversial in the sense of everybody is just operating in a world where Caitlin Clark is the best player for
Yeah.
obvious reasons. I found it very interesting, and right, this could set up some fun. In addition to all the other things we have possibly coming in the next few rounds, this could set up another really fun one if these two teams meet.
Indeed. Last thing here. A couple of teams that wear red and white, Josh, get through the round of 32, which is something that they could not say last year. That being the Hoosiers of Indiana and the Stanford Cardinal.
Wasn't easy for either of them
It
either.
was not.
There were certainly points, and pretty much for 40, or in Stanford's case, more than 40 minutes, where you thought they might be going home in round two again. But
Hmm.
Kiki Erifin casually had 41 and 16. That was better than Emily Ryan's 36 for Iowa State, and Stanford survives in overtime, which would have just been a really jarring thing to see this team that you and I both picked to go to the Final Four
Yeah.
exit at home again without getting to the Sweet 16, something they did automatically before last season. But they do survive. They're back in the Sweet 16. And then Indiana, obviously, with the Miami loss last season after the great year that they had, not being able to make that deep run, not being able to go test themselves against the Iowas and UConns and South Carolinas and LSUs of the world. They got South Carolina this time
Hmm.
after, Mackenzie Holmes makes some huge plays down the stretch, really takes over the game. Sydney Parrish was really good too. And they were facing an Oklahoma team that seems to just come up short at this junction season after season. And IU holds serve at home. They don't end on their home floor again. Very closer game than that scoreline indicates, but ultimately, particularly Mackenzie Holmes, but the Hoosiers make the plays they need, and now they're going to get their opportunity. I'm very, very curious about this game because I feel like of the four seeds, especially with Virginia Tech not having Elizabeth Kitley, this might be the team that on the right day can actually really challenge South Carolina. I'm glad they are getting this opportunity because of what they've done the past two seasons.
Yeah.
They deserve this kind of moment in the NCAA tournament, and we're going to see how this thing goes.
Yeah. This is. We discussed the idea of which Sweet 16 matchup is most intriguing to you, and that's the one for me for that exact reason. I think one that we missed out on Indiana's what could have been Indiana's moment last year because
Mhm.
we just didn't get to it, which was unfortunate because that was one of the more special years that any basketball program in the state of Indiana has put together in the last 10 or 15 years or so. It really was quite something, and and who knows, they could get South Carolina could beat the doors off of them. Like that could happen. But I think you're right that on the right night, especially when you have a player like Mackenzie Holmes, you have a roster that has so much college basketball under their belts that potentially on the right night it can be a very close one, especially when you consider that South Carolina is undefeated this year. They haven't been perfect and they have been tested at times, so it's not like this is a team that is beaten absolutely everybody by 25 points. So it doesn't feel untouchable in that way.
Mhm.
Um, of course, kind of similar to Duke, there's a level that South Carolina can get to that Indiana just can't do anything about. But on the right night, if you get another performance from Mackenzie Holmes to kind of jumpstart it, and then it's a slightly off shooting night for South Carolina, and you put a couple things together, and all of a sudden it's a 3-point game halfway through the fourth quarter. I'm really excited about that one, and I'm excited about the matchup that we have in the Portland 4 region between NC State and Stanford as a result of Stanford surviving against Iowa State as well.
That was going to be mine in terms of the one I'm most intrigued by, just because you feel like that region is up for grabs, with Texas being I would argue, the most vulnerable number 1 seed. So if you're NC State and you get past Stanford, you're feeling pretty good. Obviously, we both think Stanford has a really good shot of going through as well. How do they bounce back from what happened against Iowa State and process and learn from almost going home that early? There's a lot of intrigue there for me as well. That would be my pick.
And there were both of those teams, I think, at one time or another, had an argument for, because I think we got to a point pretty early on that South Carolina was that's the best team in the country. There's probably a list of 5 or 6 teams that have been in the conversation for who's that next team. And I think NC State, especially early in the season, was one of those teams, and Stanford is always in that conversation. So from that perspective, those 2 teams, you add that alongside Texas, which is another team who has had inserted themselves into that conversation at times this year. That trio of teams, and in theory, 2 of them on a collision course to play in the Elite Eight, assuming that Texas beats Gonzaga, is super interesting, because I agree with you that I think whoever Texas runs into in that Elite Eight game, again, assuming that they beat Gonzaga, that's a very, very interesting one in terms of who's going to represent that region in the Final Four.
You can talk to yourself into all 3 of those teams just in a vacuum being Final Four caliber for sure.
Yeah. Anything else you want to get to? Men's, women's?
You mentioned Gonzaga. Congratulations to Gonzaga, only mid-major remaining on the women's side. They got the very last win that just went final. And then, it hasn't exactly been a lot of Sweet 16 appearances for them. And then also USC. I believe the last time was 1994, which is hard to comprehend, but the freshman sensation lives on. Got a little stressful there, and then they really took over, made it not so stressful by the end of that game. So congratulations to Lindsey Gottlieb and that team as well. We still have pretty much all of the superstar freshmen. We've still got Caitlin Clark, still got Paige Beckers, still got Angel Reese. This is going to be fun. Indeed.
Shout out what they're doing in Spokane with those basketball programs. They've clearly figured something out. It's a little bit insane that we don't talk more about the fact that the men's Gonzaga team has made 9 straight Sweet 16s. 9.
Yeah.
9.
Oh, and I was going to say, shout out on the Middle Tennessee State call. Impressive.
Thank you. I'll tip my cap there. Actually, am I taking too much credit there? I thought I went after FGCU. Did I mention MTSU?
No, you're right. I got the blue teams mixed up. Sorry.
MTSU, I think, was in my list. I ended up going with FGCU, but that would be irresponsible of me. I will take the fact that FGCU only lost by 3 to Oklahoma. I will take it.
I was thinking it was Middle Tennessee State, and I didn't check. That's my bad.
All good. Anything else that you'd like to get to before we get out of here?
Let's go to bed.
It's 12:52 a.m. Tuesday, March 26th. We'll be back on Friday. We'll go Friday, Sunday, Monday once again to get us through the second weekend, the Sweet 16 and the Elite 8 on both sides, the men's and the women's. So we will see you on Friday. That's the Under 8 podcast for Monday, March 25th, bleeding once again into Tuesday, March 26th. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to your shows. Follow the Under 8 Pod on Twitter. Subscribe on YouTube. Thanks so much for being here. We will see you on Friday.